Enchiladas are objectively delicious, and I've eaten probably hundreds of them from our time in Texas. At pretty much every sit-down Tex-Mex restaurant, this was my go-to. As a saucy boy myself, I love the forkful of like saucy enchilada, beans, rice, cheese, all in one. It makes for such a good bite of food. I've made rice and beans before on the channel. You can check that out here when I make fajitas and rice and beans go along with it. So I set out on the goal to make a brighter and more exciting enchilada plate. We're gonna have rich, deep braised beef enchiladas, Esquites, which are basically Mexican street corn in a bowl, and a avocado citrus salad. It's still gonna make for a delicious single forkful of food where you can get everything in one bite. It's insane, except for it's not gonna make you feel really, really heavy for hours afterwards. So let's get into it. The base of our braised beef is also gonna make up our enchilada sauce. For years, I struggled to get a sauce that nails the complexity of a restaurant enchilada, but I think I've nailed it with this one. We need quite a few veggies to make that happen, and we're gonna char those to get some of that delicious roasted flavor. We'll start by quartering a yellow onion and de-seeding a jalapeno. You could cut the seeds out, but a little trick is to just use a spoon to scrape them out. Makes it nice and easy. Along with the fresh pepper, we'll add 4 dried New Mexican chili pods. These need to be de-seeded as well, but you can pretty much just remove the top and shake out the seeds. These give a much deeper flavor to the sauce without adding much spice. To give our final sauce texture and body, I'll have 4 tomatoes and 4 tomatillos. Tomatillos are much more tart than tomatoes, and they bring some much needed acidity to the braise, but feel free to only use 3 if you want it to be a little bit less acidic. They need to be husked and washed before cutting, as they've got the sticky residue all along the outside of them. We'll add 4 cloves of crushed garlic as well, and toss the whole pile of veggies with a bunch of salt and oil. The beef today is going to be around 2 pounds of chuck roast that I've trimmed some of the hard fat off of it. There are usually these pockets of hard pieces that you don't want in the final braise. Cut that into a few large pieces so that they cook faster and we can get more browning. Chuck is great for this as it's going to turn tender and luscious as it cooks. Season each side with salt and let that sit while we char our veggies. For a nice little secret special seasoning, we need a teaspoon of cumin seed, very traditional, half a cinnamon stick, and a bay leaf. At the stove, get your largest skillet over medium-high heat and add your veggies when it's ripping hot. If you don't have a large pan, do this in batches. Let these sit on their cut side until you really see some good browning taking place. I like to position the garlic and dried chilies on top so they don't burn while everything else gets browned. Once they're nice and charred, remove them from the heat, turn off the flame, and add your cumin and cinnamon to the pan. The residual heat is enough to toast them in about a minute or so. Keep an eye out for anything burning though. Now that those are done, we can get our braising vessel over medium-high heat. Once hot, add a squeeze of oil and place your beef in the pan. At this stage, we just want color on the beef and fond in the pot. That's the good stuff that sticks to the bottom of the pot and gives a bunch of flavor. Remove your beef once browned and add a small squeeze of tomato paste. This is really just for a little bit of flavor, color, and depth. Let that fry slightly until darkened, but don't let the fond burn. Any burning at this stage is going to ruin the flavor of the final sauce. Splash a little water into the pan and scrape up all those flavorful bits, and then stir in 3 cups of beef stock. Add your veggies along with the beef and any juices that have accumulated, then bring this whole thing up to the simmer. At this point, I only like to add a small pinch of salt as we're going to reduce the heck out of this later, and if we add too much now, it's all over. Lower the heat to a bare simmer, cover the pot, and say goodbye for around 3 hours or so. I promise something delicious, not quick. If you want something quick, check out last week's video about pasta recipes you can make in like 10 minutes. With all this time, we can prep part 2, the sides and extras. We're talking sauteed corn, one of the best salads you've ever had, and a little bonus recipe. Starting with the corn, we'll take 4 ears and remove the kernels from them. An easy way to do this is with an inverted bowl inside of a larger one. Place the cob on top and slice downward. This really just keeps kernels from flying all over your board where you work. Work through those cobs and you'll be left with beautiful gems of corn. We also need some jalapeno and red onion, so break those down as well. These are going to be used for a couple of different things, so only dice half the onion. We also need a couple of limes just prepped and ready to go. 3 is probably good here, but I like having a little bit of extra around if I want to spice up a marg or beer later. Also, this gives you some room because there's a big divide between the juiciest and driest limes, so that can make a huge difference. Crema is probably the easiest recipe on here, but it tastes so much better than just regular old sour cream. Take one of those small containers of full-fat Greek yogurt and mix in a large pinch of salt and the juice of a lime. Mix in a little bit of water to thin it out and give it a quick taste to make sure it's limey enough. You want this bright and creamy, perfect to add into our corn and on top of our enchiladas. That can chill in the fridge along with a few tablespoons of crumbled queso fresco. This is a salty cheese and it's going to be great for both the corn and enchiladas. Here's what our braise looked like at the 1 hour mark, and through the magic of editing, here's our braise at 3 hours. All that time has broken down the fat and tissue in the beef to create this fork tender product. We can remove the meat from the pot, let it cool, and fish out your cinnamon stick and bay leaf. Now our Dutch oven is full of those broken down veggies, and that flavor in the pot is insane. To turn this into our beautiful enchilada sauce, we'll blend this with a stick blender, or you could ladle it into a full blender and mix it until the chunks are broken up. If you want a ton of texture here, keep blending until everything is close to smooth. What I like to do though is run about 80% of this mixture through a strainer so that the sauce is really smooth with just like a small amount of pulp. As it reduces, that little bit of vegetable pulp is going to give the sauce some good texture and mouthfeel. Look at all the skin and seeds that come out, that's why I like straining it. This goes back on the stove over medium-high to reduce by at least half. I usually cook this down to about 1/3 of the starting volume though. Use the sides of your pan as the judge, and depending on your heat, this can take 15 to 25 minutes or so. Here's that little bonus recipe I promised you. Our salad later needs an avocado dressing, which uses half an avocado and the juice of a lime. Place those in a high-sided container and we'll blend those later. With those leftover avocados and limes, let me teach you how to make some surprise guacamole. For my money, guac is almost always undersalted and underlimed. I want a guac that's flavorful and punchy, not just creamy. Take the meat out of 2 avocados and season them with a really hefty pinch of salt. It should almost feel uncomfortable how much salt you're putting in. Mash that with a fork or a potato masher and then squeeze in the juice of 1 large lime. Going back to that scale from earlier, if you got a particularly dry lime, use some more. You could leave this as is, but I like a little red onion and jalapeno in mine as well, which is perfect because we've got some of that from earlier. Hey, wait a second, it's almost like I planned this. Taste that with a chip to check for seasoning and then serve it with some crumbled queso fresco on top. It's simple, it's perfect, it's guacamole. Here we can finish up our corn as well. Add your kernels to a medium-high skillet with a touch of olive oil. Season them with salt and pepper as they cook, but let them sit on the first side to start taking on some color. Your pan is looking a little dry, add a bit more oil, and then add your onion and jalapeno. You be the judge of how much you like of those. I don't like a ton of jalapeno in this. I want the corn to be bright and sweet. Keep the pan hot and let the corn develop nice, dark, roasty goodness. Because this is fresh corn, keep an eye out for popping kernels and be sure to scrape the bottom as the sugar in the corn can really start to stick. Remove that from the heat once brown and set it aside. We'll add our crema and queso fresco later once it's cooled. While the sauce continues to reduce, shred your beef and remove any large chunks of leftover fat. Also hand pull around 5 ounces of queso Oaxaca. This is a really nice stretchy melty cheese that I prefer over something like a cheddar blend for the interior of an enchilada. Continue reducing your sauce until the consistency of that of an enchilada sauce. And now we can adjust the seasoning. It's going to need a hefty amount of salt to really bring out all the depth that's there, so don't be afraid to salt it. Okay, I've got a quick note about tortillas and falling apart. Don't buy extra soft corn tortillas for this. Some companies make them, and in my experience, they tend to fall apart way more than just regular corn tortillas from a package. I had to give up on frying these because they just fell apart each time I tried. They also fell apart a little bit later in the pan, but usually that's not the case if you use just normal corn tortillas, so go with those. This is just what my store had. On to building. This recipe is enough for a dozen enchiladas, but my pan only fits 7 or so that's what I'm making. With our meat pulled and our sauce slightly cooled, begin dipping your corn tortillas in the sauce. Let them get covered on both sides and set them on a plate. Stacking them allows the sauce to absorb and soak into each one. Use a spatula for this as tongs can rip them apart. Toss your shredded beef in half a cup of the sauce to bring some nice moisture to the party. Just like a lasagna, place a thin layer of sauce on the bottom so it doesn't stick. Start with a few tablespoons of the beef each and a few strands of the queso Oaxaca. You know when you've got a good pizza and the cheese doesn't just like dissolve on top? It's got a squeaky chew to it? That's sort of what this cheese does for enchiladas. There's more heft to it. Once they're all nice and rolled, top with the rest of your enchilada sauce. You should have about half a cup or so left. Place some more Oaxacan cheese on top and a sprinkle of cheddar just for the classic enchilada vibe. These can go in a 375-degree oven for about 15 to 25 minutes. While that cooks, we can really gild the lily here. That means we'll make our salad, dress it, and dress our corn. For the salad, chop a package of romaine lettuce into chunks and wash it. I like a little bit of red onion in this, but not too much, so I'll thinly slice a quarter of one. If you haven't had orange in a salad before, you're straight up missing out. It's delicious and always feels like a nice little treat. I'll just cut this down the middle and then separate it into segments as it's pretty large. Slice a couple of radishes and then add that to the mix as well. For our dressing, take your avocado and lime container from earlier and add a pinch of salt along with a tablespoon of cider vinegar. Blend that with a stick mixer until smooth and then blend in 1 tablespoon of olive oil. With the blender still running, add in 2 tablespoons of neutral oil. Something like vegetable or canola is good for this because we don't want the flavor of the olive oil to be overpowering. This is going to be a little bit thicker than your average dressing, so be mindful of that. This is going to coat our salad like nobody's business. Our cheese is melted and our enchiladas are bubbling so they can come out. For the final touches, toss your corn with 2 tablespoons of queso fresco and a tablespoon of the crema. If you want a little bit more for it to be creamier, add a little more. Squeeze on some lime and top it with some cilantro that's definitely not parsley. Right near the end, toss your salad and a few tablespoons of that dressing. For the enchiladas, sprinkle on a little queso fresco, drizzle that crema if you like, and finish it with more of that. I can't believe it's not cilantro. Build yourself a plate with each of the ingredients and get ready to enjoy some next level enchilada deliciousness. We had some friends over when I made this and they were blown away at how good the enchiladas and sauce were. The sauce is complex, deep, rich, but it's also bright from the tomatillos. It's unlike any other enchilada around. This is a super delicious meal that doesn't make me feel like immediately taking a nap after, so it's a win-win. If you love enchiladas and learned something today, maybe throw a like on the video. If you want more Tex-Mex, check out this deep dive into one of my favorite breakfast foods, breakfast tacos. Thank you so much for watching, and thanks to all the amazing people supporting me on Patreon. Cheers!